let's talk now to Ciaran Browne, who's an assistant professor of conflict resolution and reconciliation studies at Trinity College in Dublin, and he joins us live now from Belfast. So, Ciaran, 4 sets of hostage releases, a 4th prisoner release also taking place, aid rolling into the enclave in a much larger scale now. The two sides have navigated some tricky moments over the last couple of weeks of this ceasefire. So what's your assessment of how it's going so far?
Well, thanks as always for having me join you. My assessment is just sitting here in almost disbelief watching these pictures. I can hear the shock in everybody's voices. I mean, these are truly harrowing pictures. I mean, they're joyful pictures in the one sense, but when you see the impact of being incarcerated in Israeli jails and what that has on these Palestinian captives, it's absolutely shocking. I mean, it is a very, very sensitive time at this where we're at. I mean, you know, clearly we are in this first phase of the negotiations to try and make this a much more long-term arrangement. But again, whenever we're talking about this, the long-term arrangement has to really center the fact that Gaza remains a besieged strip. It remains a besieged population. And this has to be front and center in all of our thinking. We can't get to a stage where we have these moments of progress, and we can see this as progress, and then revert back to the destruction that we've witnessed in the last 16 months and 76 years. So I think really it is a crucial moment, and it's hard not to be absolutely emotionally blown away with what's happening on the TV screens in front of us.
Yeah, and Ciaran, I think it's really striking as well, listening to our reporter saying there about it really emphasizes the level of control that Israel has across the occupied territories, you know, visiting prisoners' families on the day before and saying, look, we don't want any celebrations. The fact that many of them just can't actually get home because of checkpoints, because of road closures enacted by the Israelis. It really speaks to the intensity of the level of occupation that's already taking place in the occupied West Bank, never mind, as you say, in Gaza.
Yeah, and like anybody that knows anything about the situation in Palestine will know that the Israelis control all aspects of life in the West Bank, all movement through carving up the land with checkpoints and everything like that. And you know, and your reporter mentioned it. We have to bear in mind here at this moment in time, the Israelis are attacking Jenin in the north. They have been attacking Tucharim. They have been attacking various areas in the West Bank and killing Palestinians and arresting Palestinians. So at the end of the day, you know, we have to keep in mind what's going on here. It's not, you know, these guys are getting released, but they can't even get home because of the situation, as your reporter mentioned there. And I mean, even trying that aspect of controlling how people should feel and have emotions around this, like it's quite unbelievable, really. And it is for shame. We really need to put a lot of pressure on this Israeli government. International pressure needs to come to bear to say, look, this occupation, this apartheid reality needs to be brought to a close. Palestinians deserve the right to live with dignity and freedom and self-determination, and everything that we take for granted, Palestinians are absolutely entitled to.
And despite these scenes of joy and jubilation and these releases on both sides, many expect that phase 2 of the ceasefire deal, talks for which are expected to begin on Monday, many think this will be perhaps the most difficult part of it all, dealing with some of the most thorny and contentious issues. Can you just remind us about exactly why that is and whether you expect it, given what we've seen so far, to go well?
Well, geez, anybody that makes predictions in this time that we're living in, or when it comes to the situation on the ground in Palestine, is a braver person than I am. I mean, we were told from the beginning that the two ultra-right groups that prop up the Netanyahu government would not support the moving towards the phase 2. Smotrich said that he would pull his group from the government if the war in Gaza did not resume in the immediate aftermath of this first prisoner swap. So, I mean, there is apprehension, of course there is. Now, this is where the international pressure really needs to come to bear. This is where there needs to be a sense that you have an agreement in place. Remember, this agreement is very much similar to the agreement that was on the table last May, by the way. And we should always remember that. We could have avoided a lot of destruction and a lot of misery and a lot of death. So we have to ensure that the international partners and the guarantors and the mediators and whatever else really begin to ratchet up the pressure and put pressure on those parties to this agreement to say, look, we want to see this stick. We want to move forward with this. It can't be the case that we just have this temporary respite and then return to the chaos and the catastrophe that has been the last 16 months. And so I don't want to make those predictions because, again, I really don't know. My feeling is hopefully we can see progress, but progress has to also mean, as I keep reverting back to, a full lifting of the siege on Gaza, meaningful conversations around a future in Palestine that is based on equality, dignity, respect, upholding the principles of international law, and then Palestinian self-determination, whatever the Palestinian people choose for that to look like.
And you say that this is going to be a lot about external pressure on Israel, on Hamas to kind of, as you say, move towards some kind of meaningful, sustainable peace. Do you feel like there is the appetite among some of Israel's closest allies, namely the US, for that? Or do you think once we've seen the release of greater numbers of hostages, actually kind of the enthusiasm for that will wane and perhaps the Trump administration might move on to other things?
Well, we've heard his rhetoric, haven't we, in the last few weeks? It hasn't been great. He's been saying things about, we're just going to move everybody out of Gaza and start again type thing. So, I mean, we've heard his rhetoric. It hasn't been very hopeful in that regard. But in many ways, we don't really know what way Trump will go on this or what way the American government will go on this. At the end of the day, it is about various other constituent elements putting pressure. I mean, can you imagine being a family member of the other Israeli hostages and then seeing this deal collapse? Haven't seen a few Israeli hostages get out in the first stage. So that will be a pressure point for the Israeli government. I have no doubt about that as well. And then you have to take a bigger step and see, look, what is the long-term impact of this latest round of grossly asymmetric warfare been on? What has the impact been on Israeli society as a whole? I mean, Israeli society is really at a crossroads here when it comes to its engagement in sort of continuing this process and this war. So, there's lots of pressure points. It's not just the Americans. There's lots of different groups that will be putting pressure on the Netanyahu government. And again, we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu survive so many scandals and issues over his tenure. So we'll see how he moves forward with this one.
Absolutely. He does seem to be a politician, a statesman who seems to be able to thread just the most tiny and the most difficult of needles. Ciaran, 15 months of conflict later, after October the 7th, and now after 2 weeks nearly of ceasefire, do you think he's emerged stronger or more credible, or do you think actually his position is as precarious as it's ever been?
Well, sometimes we forget this man has an international arrest warrant on his head. The ICC have put an international arrest warrant out for alleged crimes, war crimes. So, I mean, I would like to think that the world has said that he's in a much more precarious position. I mean, he's not able to travel. Himself and Yoav Gallant are not able to travel or shouldn't be able to travel for fear of being arrested. So, I mean, we always need to remind everybody that is actually something that we should be taking very seriously. And if we were, really genuinely interested in international law, we would be looking for ways of enforcing that. I mean, at home, in terms of his position within Israeli politics, it remains to be seen. I have absolutely no idea, and I dare say that it will be tested in the near future in an election at some stage, and it will be up to the Israeli public, and it'll be up to the Israeli people. And I've always said this: these guys get elected in to government. The people on the ground in Israel can decide whether or not they are happy that this has been taking place in their name. The Israeli public have an opportunity here to get rid of Netanyahu, to get rid of these settler extremist parties in their government, to take to the streets again and say not just about their concerns about a supposed democracy or their concerns about the Israeli government, but to say things like, we don't want to live as a country or as a nation state that is responsible for genocide or that is responsible for upholding an apartheid regime against people that live next door to us. So the Israeli public have a role to play in this, and I really hope that they go to the ballot box and they express their disdain and their disgust for this man who has led them through an absolute devastation of Palestine and an absolute litany of war crimes that has fundamentally, I believe strongly, changed the reputation of the Israeli state on the global stage forever.
All right, Brendan, Ciaran Browne from Trinity College, Dublin, thank you so much for your analysis on TRT World this morning. It's much appreciated. Great to speak to you as we've been seeing, as you say, some really harrowing and difficult scenes, but also joyful scenes coming from Ramallah in the West Bank. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.